I remember the moment that bullet tore through the early morning air. 1 second I was listening to the low hum of insects buzzing across the ranch fence, and in the next instant there was a sharp crack that thundered through my skull. My knees buckled almost immediately, and I tasted dust as my entire body hit the ground with a harsh impact. The world blurred around me, and all I knew for certain was the heat radiating from a fresh wound just above my right hip. The one holding the smoking gun was none other than the HOA president, a neat little name tag reading Catherine Green pinned on her immaculate blazer, her lips pressed tight in a combination of anger and something like grim satisfaction. I never thought I'd see a homeowner association official literally pull a trigger on me, yet here I was, bleeding onto dirt my family had owned for 2 centuries, with a woman I'd barely met standing over me with a revolver. I should back up, though. Not to soften the shock. I reckon you can't soften nearly getting shot to death. But to give some context on why a well-dressed woman from an HOA decided that a bullet was the best solution to our dispute. My name's James Carter, and this land, Carter Hill Ranch, has been in my family for over 200 years. We're in a part of Texas where the breeze seems to carry the echoes of history. The same oak trees that shaded my ancestors stand tall near the creek, and the house that rests at the edge of our main pasture was built by my great-great-grandfather's own hands. Generations of Carters expanded the property, endured droughts and recessions, overcame personal tragedies, and clung stubbornly to every acre. About a decade ago, the suburbs began inching our way. I watched brand new cul-de-sacs sprout up like weeds, complete with manicured lawns and tidy sidewalks that had never once felt a horse's hoof. Then came the HOAs, homeowners associations, wielding an uncanny blend of petty power and surprising legal clout. They started with seemingly harmless gestures, newsletters that insisted on certain fence colors, friendly suggestions to keep grass trimmed below a certain height. I ignored it. I wasn't in their jurisdiction, after all. Carter Hill Ranch stood well outside the official boundary lines of the newly formed Willow Lake Estates, or Willow Lake Annex, or whatever new name they'd conjure each year. So I dismissed their flyers, believing that if I just minded my own business, they'd mind theirs. But that's the thing about HOAs, especially those run by the ambitious and unscrupulous. They're like creeping vines, always seeking new territory, always hungry for more control. Rumors swirled that the developer who built Willow Lake Estates was eyeing expansions. My land was prime real estate. Rolling hills, pristine creek access, old oak groves that gave the horizon an unmistakable majesty. More families kept moving in, and with them came bigger, more powerful HOA boards. I tried to stay cordial, but tension brewed the moment they realized I'd never signed any membership agreement. I'd been approached by a polite, mild-mannered representative months before everything went to hell. She tried to show me how the HOA rules enhanced property values and maintained consistency. I'd simply told her, "Thanks." Then came Catherine Green. Stepping into her role as the new HOA president, she wasted no time making her presence known. I recall the first time she drove down the dusty road that leads to my ranch. She stepped out of her SUV in high heels that sank into the dirt, her expression full of cool determination. She introduced herself with a practiced smile, explaining that the Willow Lake HOA had recently annexed new territory, including farmland. She rattled off lines about membership dues, about uniform property aesthetics, about the importance of community standards. I stood in silence on the porch, letting her talk. After a while, I showed her the official county map with boundary lines that excluded Carter Hill Ranch from Willow Lake's domain. She maintained her composure, but wore a tight-lipped smile as though she found me naive. "You'll find times change, Mr. Carter," she said, brushing dust off her blazer. "It's more convenient for us if you sign these forms now and become part of the community. We can avoid future legal disputes." She handed me a sheaf of papers, each one dense with HOA jargon and legal references. I skimmed enough to see it was basically an agreement placing me under HOA oversight, requiring me to pay monthly fees, and giving them rights to enforce building codes and property standards. I appreciate the visit, I said, but my family's ranch has never been part of Willow Lake Estates or any HOA. We have historical protections recognized by the county, even the state. I'm not signing anything. She stared at me for a moment. I expected anger, but what I saw was something more subdued and calculating, like a cat watching a mouse. I'm sure you'll change your mind once you see how beneficial the HOA can be, she replied softly. Then she left. In the following days, I received letter after letter, each stamped with the Willow Lake HOA logo, instructing me to remove unauthorized structures. They listed my barn, my greenhouse, and even my windmill as violations. Some letters threatened fines, others vaguely warned about future escalation. I kept every one of them, fully intending to bring them to the county office. The county clerk, an old friend of my father, confirmed my ranch was absolutely outside Willow Lake's official boundary. The clerk also suggested I keep an eye on them, since sometimes developers would attempt a stealthy annexation. Watch your property lines, the clerk said with a sigh. If they can't get you to sign, they might try to buy out your land, or they'll get the city to redistrict it. There's big money in suburban expansions these days. Sure enough, real estate agents started calling me, offering outrageous sums if I sold. Some developers wrote friendly letters praising the scenic potential of Carter Hill and how it might become a lovely retirement community. I refused them all. My father would roll in his grave if I gave up the ranch so easily. A couple of weeks later, petty vandalism started. My fence was cut in places, letting cattle wander onto the road. My feed store deliveries went missing, though the delivery driver insisted he left them at the main gate, as always. I found a for sale sign staked in my front pasture one morning. Someone had hammered it in overnight. Another day, the well pump was tampered with, the wiring pulled loose. There was no direct evidence it was the HOA or their cronies, but I wasn't stupid. I installed a few motion sensor cameras near gates, made sure I had a shotgun loaded with birdshot for scaring off trespassers. That was all before the confrontation turned violent. One evening, I arrived home from picking up supplies and found Catherine Green waiting in my driveway, leaning against her SUV with arms folded. A tall man in a suit stood next to her, likely a lawyer or associate. She cut to the chase, telling me that the HOA board had filed legal claims stating Carter Hill Ranch was now under Willow Lake's oversight. You can sign the membership documents or face serious fines, she said, her voice calm as a judge pronouncing a sentence. If you think you're immune because you have some old dusty maps, think again. Times change, lines shift, and we have the resources to ensure compliance. An anger rose in me, but I stayed composed. I've already spoken to the county, I told her, and they confirmed my property is not in your domain. Please leave. The tall man cleared his throat and started quoting obscure municipal codes, something about expansions. I'd had enough. Get off my property, I snapped, or I'll call the sheriff. Catherine never broke eye contact. It doesn't have to be this way, she said. Tell that we're offering you a good deal. The HOA can ease your burdens, help with maintenance, avoid confrontations. She let her gaze sweep over my old barn. It'd be unfortunate if something happened to your property. At that, I felt a genuine chill. They left soon after, once it was clear I wouldn't budge, but the air felt thick with unspoken threats. Days turned to weeks. I stayed vigilant, installed more cameras. Harriet Turner, my friend since childhood, dropped by often to keep me company. She had grown up just a few miles down the road and felt protective of me after my father passed. Harriet was fiery, short in stature but big in spirit, not afraid of calling out wrongdoing. She rummaged with me through old dusty records of the ranch's history, finding land grants from the 1800s, official recognition from the state for its historical significance, and old photos of my ancestors with horses and cattle. We made copies, prepared for the possibility that we'd have to defend Carter Hill in court. One night, Harriet and I were sitting in my living room, poring over documents, when we heard a faint pop in the distance. Seconds later, the power blinked out. I flicked on a flashlight, heart hammering, and Harriet whispered, "It came from outside, like something hitting the transformer." We stepped onto the porch to see sparks at the old transformer near the main gate. Our power lines had been shot at close range. Harriet swore colorfully. We both suspected who might be behind this sabotage. I called the sheriff, but by the time he arrived, nobody was around. I gave a statement, showed him the letters I'd gotten from the HOA. The sheriff sighed. "Without direct proof, I can't arrest them for what might just be random vandalism," he explained. "But I'll keep an eye out, James. This is out of hand." Despite the sabotage, I pressed on. Replaced the wires, hammered a few boards across my gates to discourage trespassers. Harriet tried to rally some supportive neighbors who despised the HOA's overreach. Some local folks, especially the older generation, voiced solidarity. They remembered how Carter Hill Ranch had always helped the community, whether by donating produce during rough years or hosting local fundraisers. Younger families, worried about property values, were more inclined to side with Catherine Green, lured by the promise of tidy neighborhoods and rising real estate prices. That's how Willow Lake's HOA thrived. It dangled illusions of higher property values and uniform living conditions. At that point, I believed the worst that might happen was endless petty harassment and a drawn-out legal battle. Then came the morning she shot me. I had just hopped off the porch, coffee in hand, intending to walk out to the orchard behind the house. Rusty, my old cattle dog, had trotted around the corner, sniffing the air with mild interest. That's when I heard an engine roar, and I turned to see Catherine Green's SUV tear into my driveway. The door flung open with a slam, and she emerged with lightning in her eyes. Before I could even greet her or ask her to leave, she pulled a revolver from her purse. My stomach churned in pure shock. Everything happened in slow motion, the muzzle pointing my way, the crack, the sudden piercing agony in my side. I dropped the coffee, hearing the mug shatter on the ground. My legs gave out, and I landed on my back in the dust, blinking up at the bright sky. She stood above me, shaking slightly from the recoil. My thoughts spiraled. Did she just kill me? Her expensive heels crunched gravel next to me. I could see a wisp of gun smoke drifting from the barrel. "You should have just signed," she murmured, her voice wavering between anger and something else. Fear, maybe. Blood seeped into my shirt. My mind raced. Why was she doing this so openly, in broad daylight? Then I noticed a second vehicle parked near the gate, tinted windows glinting. Perhaps she felt emboldened by some twisted confidence, or maybe she thought no one would believe my side of the story if I died. She grit her teeth. "Give me the papers, James, the ones that prove your claim. Give them to me." "Go to hell," I spat, coughing on the dryness. Rusty barked furiously, but the poor dog was too terrified to approach. I felt a wave of dizziness, darkness creeping in. Through blurred vision, I saw her rummage through the pockets of my coat that had been draped across a chair. She yanked out some of the documents Harry and I had copied, scanning them quickly, her face contorting into something savage. "This is worthless," she hissed. "You really think these old lines will stop us?" That was when I heard Harriet's voice, shouting from the back porch. "Get away from him!" Harriet sprinted toward us, wielding her phone, presumably calling 911 with trembling fingers. Catherine flinched at the sight of Harriet, as if not expecting a witness. Then headlights flashed at the gate, a truck engine revved. Catherine cursed under her breath, stuffed the documents into her bag, and scrambled to her SUV. Her tires kicked up a cloud of dust as she sped away, leaving me gasping on the ground, Harriet kneeling beside me, hands pressed desperately to my bleeding side. I heard her voice. "Stay with me, James. Stay with me." My consciousness wavered. The next thing I recall, paramedics were lifting me onto a stretcher, their voices urgent. Rusty howled from the yard, Harriet shouting instructions about my allergies, about who to call. My eyelids fluttered. At some point, Harriet leaned close and whispered, "You hang on, you hear me? She's not winning." I tried to nod, but the swirling chaos engulfed me. When I woke up in the hospital, the smell of disinfectant hit my nostrils like a slap. A dull ache gnawed at my side, reminding me I was alive. Harriet was dozing in a chair. A nurse noticed I was awake, stepped over, checked my vitals, asked if I was in pain. I felt numb, physically and emotionally. Harriet jerked awake when she heard me speak. She rushed over, eyes bright with relief, then hovered uncertainly, not wanting to jostle me. "You're going to be all right," she said softly, voice cracking with emotion. "You lost blood, but they got you in time." A day later, a county deputy visited me. He took my statement, asked for details about the shooting. I told him about Catherine, how she demanded property documents. Harriet corroborated the story. The deputy frowned, noting that Miss Green claimed it was self-defense, that I'd threatened her with a weapon. I nearly leapt from the bed in anger. "That's a damned lie," I roared. Harriet placed a calming hand on my shoulder, reminding me not to rupture stitches. The deputy raised a soothing palm. "We'll investigate. But Ms. Green's lawyer is claiming she felt endangered on your property. We do have Harriet's witness account." Harriet's eyes flashed. "What about the bullet that tore through him unprovoked, or the brandishing of a firearm?" The deputy shrugged apologetically. "We're collecting evidence. Keep in touch." My frustration was immeasurable. It was as if I was living in a bad dream. The bullet retrieved from my body could confirm it came from her gun, but she'd likely claim it was justifiable if she convinced enough officials. Harriet insisted I rest, but I couldn't just lie there, helpless. We had to collect our own evidence, confirm boundary lines again, and prove that this was a cold-blooded assault. I asked Harriet to reach out to an attorney who specialized in property and criminal law. She connected me with a forthright lawyer named Ava Jennings. Ava had a reputation for championing underdogs, especially in cases involving land rights and underhanded tactics by wealthy developers. Ava arrived at the hospital a few days after the shooting, a stack of papers under her arm. She laid out the situation. "We'll need to demonstrate you're not under Willow Lake's HOA jurisdiction, obviously. Also, we must show that Catherine Green is lying about self-defense. Harriet's eyewitness testimony will help. We'll gather ballistic evidence, any camera footage, anything that proves she arrived armed and left you for dead." My head pounded from painkillers, but I nodded resolutely. "Whatever it takes," I said. "She's not doing this to me or to my land." Ava's next steps included contacting the county surveying department, the State Historical Commission that recognized Carter Hill Ranch, and the recorder's office that had copies of original land grants. Harriet pitched in, rummaging the ranch for older documents we might have missed. Meanwhile, I tried to heal, wincing every time I shifted in bed. The bullet had narrowly missed vital organs, the doctor said. Some called me lucky. I called it a small miracle that Harriet arrived when she did. While I recuperated, tension in Willow Lake soared. Word spread that their president allegedly shot a longtime local rancher. The HOA board scrambled to control the narrative, issuing statements about their fear for personal safety and the extreme unpredictability of this particular landowner. Harriet told me about the rumors swirling among the neighbors. Half were appalled that any HOA official would resort to such violence. The other half believed their president's story that I was some unhinged wild man with no respect for boundaries. Officially, the sheriff's department was investigating, but talk was cheap, and Catherine's connections ran deep. She had friends in the local government, real estate circles, and possibly even in law enforcement. The day I was discharged from the hospital, Harriet drove me home. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through my side, but I gritted my teeth. Carter Hill Ranch looked almost the same. The fields, the orchard, the sturdy front porch, yet it felt different, tinged with the memory of violence. Rusty bounded up, whining at my bandaged side as if he understood that something terrible had happened. Harriet guided me gently into the house, fussing over the comfortable arrangement of pillows on the couch. My plan was to spend a few days resting there, with Harriet close by to help. We had a security camera system installed, courtesy of a volunteer friend who was outraged by the shooting. That evening, Harriet brewed tea in the kitchen, her voice drifting into the living room. "I asked around," she said. "Seems like Ms. Green is preparing a lawsuit against you for defamation. She's doubling down on the self-defense claim. It's insane." I tried to remain calm, but my heartbeat quickened. "Let her file. We'll countersue for assault." Harriet nodded, though worry lined her face. Sure enough, papers arrived the next day. A process server knocked on my door, delivering the official complaint. Catherine Green vs. James Carter. Allegations of harassment, property damage, defamation, and assault. It was so absurd I almost laughed, except I couldn't laugh without pain shooting through my midsection. Harriet rolled her eyes. She's got some nerve turning her crime on its head. I immediately forwarded the documents to Ava, who promised a swift, thorough response. Over the following weeks as I healed, Harriet and I combed through more ranch records, searching for every possible piece of evidence that Carter Hill was outside the Willow Lake HOA boundary. We found some interesting items: an old letter from a county commissioner dating back 3 decades, reaffirming that Carter Hill's land was recognized as a historical site, exempt from typical municipal expansions. Harriet shot photos of it with her phone, sending them to Ava. She also discovered a set of journals kept by my grandfather, describing how local developers tried to force the ranch into earlier expansions, but were thwarted by the Historical Commission. Harriet's eyes gleamed. This is gold. No judge can read this and still side with that woman. While we built our case, sabotage continued. My chicken coop was broken into. The feed was scattered around as though someone wanted to starve the chickens or scare them. A few nights later, Harriet swore she heard footsteps under the porch, but by the time I hobbled outside with a flashlight, nobody was there. One of my new security cameras captured a hooded figure skulking around the fence line at midnight, but they avoided stepping into the yard's floodlight. The next morning, I showed the footage to Harriet and the sheriff's deputy assigned to my case. The deputy sighed again. No clear face, no license plate, just more intimidation. I'll note it, but we can't arrest a shadow. Then, a glimmer of hope emerged from an unlikely source, another man who'd had a run-in with Catherine Green. He reached out to Harriet on social media, revealing that he used to live in a different city, where Catherine served on a different HOA board. According to him, she had orchestrated a similar scheme, forging documents to claim expansions, threatening older residents, eventually pushing them to sell cheap to developer friends. She walked away with a fortune once those developments broke ground. That man, called Jeremiah Cook, said she was cunning and had a network of lawyers, but eventually she'd left town under a cloud of suspicion, dodging a potential lawsuit. Harriet told me we might have an angle here. If we could show a pattern of behavior, that would bolster my case. Ava agreed, so Harriet arranged a phone call with Jeremiah. He told us stories that made my skin crawl, about phony fines, about quietly pressuring seniors to sign over land in exchange for dropping legal claims, about how some folks would wake up to see construction crews digging on land they thought was theirs. Jeremiah tried to stop her, but she'd threatened him with countersuits, until finally he moved away, unwilling to keep fighting. Harriet asked if he had any documentation. He shared some old scanned letters that matched the style of those I'd received. Some were nearly word-for-word identical in their claims. "She's recycling the same tactics," Harriet whispered, furious. We turned all this over to Ava, who pounced. She discovered a few hidden threads connecting Catherine to a real estate conglomerate known as Landwave Development. They specialized in turning farmland into suburban sprawl, often using questionable means. Ava believed Catherine was the inside woman, ensuring HOAs would expand or rezone areas so that Landwave could swoop in. "If we can confirm her link to Landwave," Ava told me, "we can argue she had a direct financial motive to remove you. This goes beyond a petty HOA matter into conspiracy territory. The district attorney might get involved, especially considering you were physically harmed." While these investigations brewed, Harriet practically moved into the ranch to help me. We fortified the place further. Stronger locks, extra motion lights. My side was healing. I could limp around without too much agony, though certain movements pulled my stitches. I tried to act normal, feeding the chickens, walking Rusty around the orchard, breathing in that familiar earthy scent of my ancestral home, but a dark cloud loomed. I felt uneasy in my own house, worried about another armed assault or a nighttime arson. Harriet would constantly glance out windows, her expression tense. Then, just as we began to see progress in our countersuit, another tragedy struck. A fire broke out near the old barn after midnight. By the time Harriet and I saw the orange glow through the window, flames were licking the aged timbers. We rushed out with buckets, hooking up hoses to the spigot, calling the fire department. I nearly collapsed from the exertion, my sides screaming. Harriet screamed for me to back off. She said I'd tear my stitches. But the barn was part of the ranch's heartbeat, older than half the county. I refused to let it burn if I could help it. Rusty barked wildly, running in circles. We managed to slow the flames until the volunteer firefighters arrived, extinguishing them fully. Part of the roof caved in, but the structure was salvageable. Investigators quickly found evidence of accelerant near the north wall. It wasn't an accident, another blow of intimidation. Harriet sank to the ground in tears. "How far will they go?" she sobbed. I felt my fists tighten in helpless rage. The sheriff's deputy took a statement, said it looked like arson, but he didn't promise quick results. I mulled over the possibility that Catherine personally orchestrated all this, or maybe her associates were acting on her behalf. Either way, we had to double down legally. Ava ramped up our countersuit, adding charges of attempted murder, harassment, property damage, and conspiracy. She believed we could bring enough evidence that either the DA would press criminal charges or a civil trial would ruin Catherine financially. Meanwhile, Catherine continued to posture publicly, claiming she was a victim of vigilante intimidation. The local news reported her side, but Harriet made sure they interviewed me and the old ranchers who vouched for me, pointing out bullet holes and burnt barn beams. The outcry caused a rift in the community. Some sided with me, outraged that an HOA would stoop to violence. Others still believed the propaganda that I was unstable and destructive, clinging to worthless old land. In the midst of these swirling tensions, the day of the first court hearing arrived. It was an initial proceeding on Catherine's defamation and assault allegations against me, ironically enough. I insisted that Harriet join me, though she was prepared to testify that Catherine was the aggressor. Ava was by our side, armed with boxes of evidence. We walked into the courthouse, my side still sore, Harriet's glare ready to strike anyone who opposed us. Catherine appeared, wearing a sharp suit, flanked by her attorney, a slick fellow named Rogers. She cast a condescending glance our way, as if she fully expected to crush us with her legal might. The hearing began, and her attorney spun a tale of how I threatened to shoot her on the day she visited, how she fired in fear. Harriet's eyes blazed with indignation, but Ava calmly presented the contradictory facts. Harriet's eyewitness account that Catherine arrived brandishing a gun, the county's maps showing that Carter Hill was not in HOA territory, plus references to the many incidents of vandalism and arson that pointed to an organized effort to force me off my land. We even had testimonies from neighbors who contradicted Catherine's story. The judge listened intently, then set a date for a full hearing on the matter. In the meantime, Ava filed a request for a restraining order against Catherine, citing my injuries, Harriet's eyewitness statement, and the pattern of harassment. It was granted on a temporary basis. Catherine's face tightened, her mouth drawn into a severe line. As we exited the courtroom, Harriet muttered, "She's furious." I nodded. She'd better be. She tried to kill me, burn my barn, and now sees we're not rolling over. We headed outside, stepping into the bright afternoon sun. Reporters swarmed, cameras rolling. Harriet and I gave brief statements. We were defending my rightful property against illegal aggression. Then we hopped in Harriet's truck and left, hearts pounding with adrenaline. Ava called me that evening, sounding excited. "We have a line on new evidence," she said. "How of the local officials is cooperating with my inquiries. Seems Ms. Green did indeed sign a secret contract with Landwave Development, promising to facilitate the transition of Carter Hill Ranch into a planned subdivision. That was the smoking gun linking her greed to the violence. With that in hand, we built an even stronger case." Ava filed additional motions, including a civil RICO claim, racketeering in the sense that Catherine and her associates conspired to extort me out of my property for profit. The local press caught wind, calling it an unprecedented move against HOA corruption. Willow Lake board members panicked. Some tried to distance themselves from Catherine, others resigned quietly. Meanwhile, as the date of the main trial approached, Harriet urged me to keep a low profile, to avoid going anywhere alone. They might try something drastic, she said. I felt uneasy but also resolute. My side was healing well, though the scar might never fade. The ranch smelled of lingering smoke from the barn's partial ruin, and I worked at night under Harriet's watchful eyes to rebuild the damaged walls. Each hammered nail felt like an act of defiance. Finally, the trial began in earnest. The courthouse was packed. Reporters, curious townsfolk, supporters for me, supporters for Catherine. She arrived with Rogers and an entire team of lawyers, no doubt funded by her wealthy developer allies. I came in with Ava, Harriet, and a handful of local supporters who knew the truth. Over the course of several days, the court heard testimonies. Harriet, voice steady, recounted the day she saw Catherine shoot me, describing every detail. I took the stand as well, carefully explaining the intimidation tactics, how I never threatened Catherine, how she arrived unannounced with a firearm. Catherine's team tried to cast doubt, claiming I was lying about not threatening her. They suggested Harriet was biased or in love with me, which Harriet angrily denied. Then Ava introduced the Landwave contract, which contained passages about facilitating transitions for the Carter property. Rogers attempted to dismiss it as inconclusive, but we had a statement from a local official confirming that Catherine had bragged about getting me out of the picture. That official testified, albeit nervously, that Catherine boasted about making sure Carter wouldn't block progress. The bullet from my side matched Catherine's revolver, which the forensic experts confirmed had been recently fired. Rogers tried to claim I'd wrestled the gun and shot myself in some bizarre frame-up, but that was too ridiculous for the jury. On day 3, we played camera footage from Harriet's phone, capturing audio of me yelling in pain, Harriet screaming to call 911. Catherine's voice was faint but audible, telling Harriet to stay back or I'll shoot you too. The hush in the courtroom was deafening. The final nail was Jeremiah Cook's testimony, given via video call, describing how Catherine employed the same modus operandi in her previous HOA fiasco. Rogers cross-examined him, but Jeremiah stuck to his story. The prosecution hammered the final point. Catherine had motive, profit from the property's forced sale, and an established pattern of intimidation. When the jury returned the verdict, they found in my favor on all major claims. The assault was unwarranted, the intimidation was real, and Carter Hill Ranch was undeniably mine, free from HOA claims. Catherine was found personally liable for damages, both punitive and actual. She also faced criminal charges for assault with a deadly weapon and attempted arson. The judge, in a grave tone, announced she would be remanded until sentence. I felt a surge of relief so powerful that my knees almost buckled. Harriet clutched my arm, tears in her eyes. I squeezed her hand. Reporters swarmed us again outside. Cameras flashed, voices overlapping. I felt no urge to gloat. I just wanted them to know that justice still mattered. Harriet spoke for me, explaining that this wasn't just about property lines, but about the principle that no one should face violence or harassment for preserving their heritage. Catherine was led out the side entrance, hands cuffed, ignoring the camera. With the verdict behind us, a calm gradually returned to Carter Hill Ranch. The charred barn still bore scars, but I'd replaced the roof beams with the help of local volunteers. We painted new boards, hammered nails in unison, talking about how the community needed to stand up to bullies who wore polished suits and had big bank accounts. Harriet helped me compile official copies of the verdict, which guaranteed that no future HOA expansions could forcibly annex my property. The developer, Landwave, quietly cut ties with Catherine, releasing a statement that distanced them from her independent actions. Ava smirked when she read that, rolling her eyes. "They knew exactly what she was doing," she remarked, "but let's see if they push any further." The sheriff's department pursued the arson angle. Evidence pointed to one of Catherine's cohorts, a man caught on a security camera buying cans of accelerant. He vanished, but a warrant was out for his arrest. Meanwhile, Harriet and I tried to move forward with our lives. I still limped sometimes, the bullet scar tugging uncomfortably if I moved too fast. But every step I took on my family's land reminded me how close I'd come to losing it all. Rusty followed me around, wagging his tail as we checked fences or fed chickens. There was an odd serenity in daily chores now, a deeper gratitude for each routine. Neighbors who had once been ambivalent swung by with small gifts or simply to apologize for not supporting me sooner. Some recounted how Catherine had convinced them I was a crazed old rancher refusing to accept progress. Others offered labor to help rebuild. Harriet took point on hosting a small ranch get-together to celebrate the victory. We invited local folks, family friends, even some from the next county over who cared about land preservation. Under the oak trees that had stood for centuries, we grilled burgers, drank sweet tea, and told stories about Carter Hill's past. Children ran through the orchard, wide-eyed at the notion that these trees predated the founding of many local towns. At one point during the festivities, Harriet found me leaning against the new barn door, gazing across the fields. She asked if I was okay. "Just thinking," I said, voice trembling with emotion. I came so close to losing it all, the orchard, the house, everything my ancestors built. And for what? Another cookie-cutter subdivision? Harriet slipped her arm around mine. "But we fought back," she said softly. "We're still here, and that means the Carters can rest easy, wherever they are." I felt tears gather at the corners of my eyes. My father would have been proud of me, of Harriet, of everyone who defended Carter Hill. A few months later, the sentencing hearing arrived for Catherine Green. I wasn't required to attend, but I did, to close this chapter. She sat at the defense table, looking smaller than before, her once pristine demeanor cracked by the weight of reality. The judge handed down her punishment. A prison term for aggravated assault and conspiracy, along with restitution for my medical bills and property damage. Rogers tried to file motions for leniency, but the judge wasn't swayed, referencing how Catherine's actions exhibited a blatant disregard for my life and the rule of law. Outside the courthouse, Harriet squeezed my hand. "It's over," she said, face turned up to the sun. I nodded, exhaling a breath I felt I'd been holding for months. There was no joy in watching a person's life crumble, even if that person had tried to kill me. But there was relief, a sense of justice. Harriet and I drove home in contented silence, letting the bright Texas sky and the swaying grass by the roadside remind us how good it felt to be free from fear. In time, Willow Lake's HOA board underwent a huge shakeup. Several members resigned under public scrutiny. The new board formally acknowledged Carter Hill Ranch was outside their jurisdiction. They even apologized, though it felt half-hearted. Developers came knocking less frequently. Some folks speculated Landwave would shift tactics or wait a decade to try again with a fresh face. But if they did, they'd find Carter Hill guarded by determined neighbors and a thick shield of legal precedent. One twilight, Harriet and I walked together to the orchard, the sweet scent of ripe peaches drifting through the air. The bullet scar tugged a bit, but not painfully, more like a reminder of the battle fought. Lanterns hung from low branches, illuminating the orchard's ancient trunks. "Do you think all of this was for a greater purpose?" Harriet asked, a note of wonder in her voice. "That maybe we had to prove something to ourselves and the community?" I sighed, letting the calm hush of evening settle on me. "Sometimes I think so," I answered. Maybe Carter Hill needed to stand up once again, just like my ancestors did, to show that not everything is for sale. She took my hand, and we strolled among the trees, stepping carefully over gnarled roots. The orchard had survived storms, droughts, and now a modern attempt at a hostile takeover. In the gentle glow of lantern light, I felt the presence of my father, my grandfather, all the Carters who'd walked this orchard before me. Their resilience lived in these old, twisted branches. The orchard felt alive with ancestral memory. It wasn't just land, it was our heritage, a living testament to loyalty, fortitude, and stubborn pride in the face of modern greed. A month later, with the ranch stable and Catherine behind bars, Harriet convinced me to host a community workshop on land rights, teaching folks about property lines, HOAs, local statutes. We had a surprising turnout. People arrived with questions about how to protect themselves from unscrupulous boards or developers. Ava even came, giving a spirited talk about the importance of historical designations and accurate surveys. The group parted that day feeling a sense of empowerment. Harriet joked that I was turning into an advocate. I shrugged, seeing it as paying forward the help I'd received. If I could keep someone else from getting shot for refusing to comply with shady deals, that was all the reason I needed. By the time a year passed since the shooting, I had mostly recovered. A faint scar on my side ached in cold weather, but was otherwise inconspicuous. The newly reinforced barn served as a point of pride. Some old timbers salvaged, some new beams adding strength. Neighbors occasionally teased that I should mount the bullet that nearly killed me on the wall as a trophy of perseverance. I never went that far, but I did keep the slug in a small metal box, a reminder of how precariously close I'd come to losing the life I cherished. Evenings on the ranch regained their serenity. I'd stand by the fence, watch the sun set over the rolling hills, the sky bursting into vivid oranges and pinks. Rusty lazed at my feet, Harriet often leaning on the fence beside me. We rarely talked about Catherine Green or the horrors that nearly ruined everything, but sometimes Harriet would say, "You know, you're tough as nails," and I'd smile, replying, "No, just too stubborn to quit." Local newspapers dubbed the saga the Carter Hill Affair, painting me as a symbol of the little guy standing firm against corporate greed disguised as an HOA. A few even ran op-eds praising Harriet's bravery. She hated the attention, preferring to be known as the local ranch girl who never liked bullies. But deep down, I knew Harriet was proud. If not for her unwavering help, I might not have had the strength or clarity to fight back. One evening, we decided to plant a new oak sapling near the orchard's edge, something to mark the ranch's continuing legacy. We dug a hole together, gingerly placed the sapling, and gently pressed the soil around its roots. "Grow strong," Harriet whispered with a grin, patting the small trunk. I repeated her words quietly. In that moment, I was reminded how life always finds a way forward, how a single planted tree can become a towering sentinel for future generations. When folks ask me now about the bullet wound, I just say the HOA president shot me because I refused to give her my 200-year-old ranch. That's the short version, the shocking version. But behind that headline is a deeper truth, a story of community, love for the land, defiance in the face of intimidation. It's about Harriet's loyalty, Ava's diligence, a stubborn refusal to be bullied, and the unbreakable bond between a man and the place his forebears called home. It's also a lesson, a warning, that greed can infiltrate even the friendliest suburbs, twisting something as benign-sounding as an HOA into a weapon. If there's one thing I learned, it's that your heritage is worth defending. Some folks see an old ranch as a chunk of land waiting to be exploited. Others see it as a legacy that connects past and future. For me, Carter Hill is more than just real estate. It's where my father showed me how to ride my first horse, where my grandfather taught me to whittle a piece of wood into a toy, where my mother planted sunflowers that still bloom every spring. You can't assign an HOA fine to that kind of history. You can't bulldoze it without tearing up generations of memory. After we planted that sapling, Harriet and I strolled back to the house. The night sky opened above us, stars winking through the darkness. We paused at the porch to breathe in the quiet, the hum of cicadas warming the air. I thought about how a single gunshot could have ended all of this, but fate and friendship intervened. Harriet wrapped an arm around my waist. Neither of us said a word, but in the hush of that Texas night, I felt a profound gratitude for every day forward. Sometimes we still get curious passers-by, folks who heard rumors or read an article wanting to see the ranch that beat the big bad HOA. If they're polite, Harriet or I will give them a short tour, show them the orchard, the old barn, the new oak sapling. We tell them we hope they never have to face something as terrifying as an armed HOA official. But if they do, we share our best advice: keep records, keep allies close, and never sign anything that compromises what you hold dear. Catherine Green remains behind bars. Word is she's appealing her sentence, though with limited success. Landwave eventually turned its focus to another county. It's always scanning for easy pickings. I suppose there'll always be a next target for those who see land solely as profit margins. But Carter Hill Ranch stands firm, as it has for 2 centuries. Defying droughts, storms, and the creeping suburban sprawl, I walked those fields each morning, side by side with Harriet and Rusty, the sunrise painting the horizon in soft golds and pinks. My steps remain a bit slower thanks to the scar, but my heart is lighter than it's ever been. In the end, what matters most is that we refused to be displaced, that we had the courage to stand up even when the threat came with legal muscle and a loaded gun. That old orchard still blossoms in the springtime, as if paying tribute to my ancestors' perseverance. Harriet and I see new life every season, a fresh wave of wildflowers in the meadow, calves frolicking under the oaks. Each day I promise myself never to take it for granted again, because while the law had to catch up with the crimes of a ruthless HOA president, the spirit of Carter Hill was never in question. We survived, we overcame, and like those oak roots that run deep beneath the soil, our resolve to protect this land will never be uprooted.